Next on KQED Newsroom.
Fighting in the back of the jail is a clear example of how they don't respect their leadership.
I find it incomplete that President Obama and everybody else wants body cameras fitted on law enforcement in the streets of America. I can make 10 times the reasons as to why body cameras should be in every prison and jail in this country.
You agree with that, Vicki?
I think body cameras are a tool. They're not the answer. I think accountability, expectations, working day to day, and no complacency.
The candidates for San Francisco Sheriff square off.
Good evening. Welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu.
And I'm Scott Schaefer. The San Francisco Sheriff's race is one of the most closely watched contests this election season. Tonight, all three candidates are here for what we hope will be a spirited discussion. We want to welcome John Robinson, who retired from the department in 1994 after 20 years of service. The current sheriff, Ross Mirkarimi, who previously served as a San Francisco supervisor. And former interim sheriff Vicki Hennessy, who retired from the department in 2010 after 36 years of service.
So let's begin. Sheriff Mirkarimi, we'd like to begin with you. There have been a lot of conflicting reports this week. Please set the record straight. Did you fail a gun marksmanship test last month?
No, I did not. And I went to practice with our undersheriff who was there to qualify. The sheriff is not required to carry a weapon. My predecessor rarely ever did. And I wanted to try a weapon that I was not familiar with, and I went to practice.
It was my understanding, though, that date, September 18th, was a date set aside for qualification tests, not for practice.
And that's why I went with my undersheriff. It was the only day I have because I'm pretty busy, and it was the best day for me to go. What
was your score on that practice round?
Oh, it was below the standard that was required, and that's why I said I'll just come back and do it again.
Vicki, does this just much ado about nothing, or does it say something about either the sheriff or how he's being unfairly, tarred by accusations like this?
I think this one may have other elements in it, and I don't think that, I do think that it's something that I don't think is a big issue.
When you say other elements, what are they?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure if everything is accurate as being portrayed in the newspaper. I'm not sure if what's being told here today is accurate. So I just suspect that there may be other things behind it, but the ultimate thing for me is about setting an example and whether or not. So if the sheriff was practicing, that's one thing. But if he was holding himself accountable because he was actually qualifying, that's another thing in terms of holding himself accountable. And that's all there is.
And Mr. Robinson, how do you feel about this whole issue?
Being an operational commander in the department previously, I never expected the sheriff to be the one walking around with the gun. I see it as a non-issue. I see it as his staff being dissatisfied with him, so they're looking for anything that creates a bad image for him. The bigger issue is that the sheriff is our public safety officer. Certainly it would look good to the department if he could qualify successfully, but I don't think that's the thing that motivates the operation of the department.
But I think you should also note the tabloid way that the Chronicle, which isn't the first time, has sort of advanced this issue nearly 2 weeks before an election. The Chronicle did this before with the Pier 14 tragedy of Ms. Steinle, when many times we asked them to print retractions and corrections and they did not. And I think that that's just reflective of a changing San Francisco, and we shouldn't tolerate the kind of bad journalism.
What do you mean by changing San Francisco?
Well, I think I let my friends here to also weigh in on it. I mean, this is a city where we like to celebrate our diversity, but the economic diversity of the city is literally being vanquished by City Hall, and I think that translates into the criminal justice system.
Well, I would also say this, that the deputies, in their urgency to point out some shortcoming of the sheriff, have not necessarily dealt with the issues of their lack of protocol, following policies and procedures. So I find it ironic that they point the finger at him for something as minor as not qualifying, because he's not expected to operate in a public safety role on a daily basis. He's the administrator of the department. But I do hold the deputies responsible for how they approach the issue. When they left the woman in the stairwell for 17 days, that was a matter of lack of protocol. No respect for leadership. As a result, did not do their job.
Let's change the subject. You mentioned Kate Steinle. Sheriff Mirkarimi in the jail released Juan Francisco Lopez Sanchez without notifying federal immigration officials. They wanted to take him into custody, apparently. He was, of course, later arrested in the tragic shooting death of Kate Steinle at Pier 14. Do you stand by your decision not to notify the federal authorities before letting him go?
I do, and I think it would be a real mistake for San Francisco to get sucked into this where politicians at City Hall are professing to support Sanctuary City, but yet telling me with a wink and a nod to practice something different. We adhere, and I believe all of us want to adhere to all laws. And there really is a schizophrenia between our municipal laws, like the ones signed into effect by Mayor Lee called Due Process for All in 2013, and how it limits that contact with ICE, and the changing federal procedures of Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement. They don't even really do detainers much anymore. They want local law enforcement to get into the civil immigration business. And where I hold my ground is that for everybody, we have to recognize the Fourth Amendment constitutional right.
But did they tell you that they would like you to hand him over?
No, and any request of a detention would not apply because Due Process for All, as it was written into law, signed by the mayor, says if somebody has a nonviolent felony, which is the case of Mr. Lopez Sanchez, we would not contact them.
Did you know, though, that Mr. Lopez Sanchez had been deported 5 times, was about to be deported again for a 6th time, and doesn't that require a judgment call in that case? I know what you're saying about what the protocol says, but as the lead administrator, as a sheriff, there are moments when judgment needs to come into play on something like that.
Absolutely, but the judgment also is to follow the laws. The laws have been set by San Francisco, and ICE knew, and this is what isn't being pressed, I think, effectively enough, is that ICE knew when he was coming out of Victorville, the federal prison, because he'd been deported and served for 4 previous violations of deportation. They knew every step of his trajectory. The bottom line is was when I met with the Homeland Security czar, Jay Johnson, we told him the laws have changed in San Francisco. 300 plus other cities are in the same position, and that we require a court order or a warrant. That's the legal constitutional thing to do.
What's the harm, though? Go ahead.
I have to say, I have to stop for a second here because I think there's more to this issue than that. And I agree that it's a judgment issue, and I would like to have seen some judgment used in this case. I think that the fact that he was in federal prison it's kind of a routine operation for federal prisons, state prisons to call jurisdictions and ask whether or not you want somebody back on a warrant. The Sheriff's Department asked for him on a warrant. It's very likely the Sheriff's Department didn't know he had a hold at that time or had an immigration hold from the Bureau of Prisons. The Bureau of Prisons then released him to San Francisco. San Francisco picked him up. He came here. He didn't have, the warrant was not held valid, or they didn't prosecute on it. They dismissed it.
It was dismissed.
And then he was due to get out that day, but he wasn't let go for the next 17 or 18 days. And I think here you can say, you know, the Federal Bureau of Prisons probably shouldn't have called San Francisco on that warrant, but the Federal Bureau of Prisons should have let immigration pick him up. But on the other hand, when you see something like that, somebody with 7 convictions for felonies, 5 deportations, somebody who's not a fabric of the community, who doesn't meet the Due Process for All law, but also you have to understand there's also another Sanctuary City law that also can pertain to this, and that's why there's a little bit of, I think the sheriff said it, schizophrenia between the two. But the fact is, you could have decided in favor of notifying ICE and just picking up the phone and saying, come and get them.
What's the takeaway then?
The takeaway is there has to be a balance of public safety along with making sure that we're providing constitutional protections.
But are you saying that the sheriff erred on the wrong side of that?
I think that he erred on the wrong side of public safety in this matter, but I want to say one more thing, and that is that nobody could have known that Francisco Lopez would go out and do it, and what would happen would happen. What we did know, though, was that he was a career criminal, and we were releasing him into a city where he had no money, he had no relationships, he had nothing.
But doesn't that happen all the time?
The Sheriff's Department does not operate in a vacuum. It is part of the criminal justice system. It has a responsibility to San Francisco, being only one of 2 elected public safety agencies. His responsibility to protect civil liberties as well as public safety is paramount. What would be the problem in just communicating? I was the first booking sergeant at City Prison when we took over from the San Francisco Police Department in 1975. Immigration detainers are not something new. You have an obligation to release them in 5 days. A lot of it is a civil issue, but this all started over a money issue. Originally, on sanctuary policies, and it's morphed into this battle over who's going to be released and who's not going to be released.
So how would you have handled it differently if you were the sheriff? Would you have picked up the phone and called ICE?
I certainly would have. What would have been wrong with simply saying, once that warrant was dismissed, what would have been wrong with simply saying, do you want this guy?
I can answer that. I'll tell you what would be wrong. The fact is that we would be returning back to the very practices that motivated Sanctuary City and due process for laws in the first place.
And that is when
let me finish my sentence. When the deputies
was initially set for families who struggled. Take a look at its history. Even from the...
Well, I can tell you, I was a member of the Board of Supervisors for 2 terms. I'm intimately familiar with this because I was an advocate and a critic where the laws were being developed, especially leading up to 2013.
I'm going back to the first sanctuary policy for juveniles.
And then what is clear in what the State Sheriff's Association just wrote on September 28th, September 28th, 58 County State Sheriff Association just sent a letter to President Obama that completely refutes what Mr. Robinson's just saying and reflects exactly what we've been characterizing, that it's an untenable position for municipal sheriff's departments to be in the detainer, civil detainer business unless you indemnify our department. So, for example, you cannot cherry pick just because it feels good to call and notify somebody to see ICE come around with their vans when somebody leaves our property and then appropriates, hijacks them.
But just a couple of weeks ago, Los Angeles, the largest county in California, decided to let immigration officials in very narrowly in cases where there were people in jail who had criminal histories and who were actually violent histories and were wanted by ICE. I mean, are you saying, what does LA know that we don't know?
Here's the way to do this. Let's be intellectually honest and transparent. Pass a law at the Board of Supervisors with the mayor that says that that's exactly the practice we want. But what I call attention to is that when you have a mayor sort of feigning or projecting similar to Donald Trump, this is where I take umbrage. And the umbrage is the fact that to profess to be a sanctuary city and then again sort of this ad hoc capriciousness completely belies the sincerity of the laws to begin with.
Let's give Vicki a chance to weigh in.
I don't think it's capriciousness, but I do think one thing. Weren't you the person that helped write the due process for all policy, and didn't you get up and testify in favor of it when it came before the Board of Supervisors for passage?
Yeah, with George Gascon and the mayor, essentially. Everybody did because there was different iterations. But I'm the sheriff. I'm not a member of the board.
Would you support those changes that you described?
Weren't you also the person, though, that had to... Didn't you realize that there were some schizophrenia between the 2 laws because one does not supersede the other? And wasn't that the time for you to look at that and decide, hey, this doesn't match that well, and maybe work to make it so it did match?
And I can actually show, because the press conference that I had in light of all this was the letter to the mayor and to the city attorney and to the supervisors that detailed all the conflicts in the law to begin with. And that's been now made declared record. And earlier I was talking about how the Chronicle and what was characterized here, we didn't seek Mr. Lopez Sanchez. Where the press seems to get it wrong is there are 2 different kind of warrants. A DA warrant we have influence on. A bench warrant, in my letter to Mayor Lee, it said, if you really want to get ahead of this, and when this doesn't happen again, at least install an administrative law judge. That can be a proper umpire for these kind of matters.
Vicki Hennessy, would you support the kinds of changes that Los Angeles has enacted now?
Not completely. I've looked at them, and I think it still goes a little too far. And I think that
Where does it go too far?
I think that basically, if I remember correctly, because I only read it once, and they're supporting PEP, and I don't necessarily support PEP, and that's the Priority Enforcement Program. And I think that it goes a little too far in the area of misdemeanors and some other crimes. I'd like to see it kept to serious felonies and violent felonies.
But see, but freeze on that. The translation, though, of not supporting PEP means you would not call or notify on Lopez Sanchez.
No.
So there's no splitting hairs on this. It is a fact. If you just heard you're not supporting PEP, you would not call on notification of Lopez Sanchez, and it's a complete contradiction.
Now, that's not what I said, because I didn't
We're going to have to move on because we've spent quite a bit of time on that issue, and there's so many other issues that I want to make sure we cover. Let's talk about the FBI investigation. The FBI is investigating allegations that 4 sheriff's deputies forced inmates to fight with each other and gamble on the results of those fights. I want to hear from each of you. As sheriff, what would you do to make sure that this does not happen again? Let's begin with you, Vicki.
Okay, well, I worked in the jails for 30 years, or I worked in the Sheriff's Department for 30 years, much of that time in the jails. I worked in the jail that this occurred in. You have a picture on your screen right now of the Hall of Justice. The 7th floor Hall of Justice is an old-style linear jail in a building that is, by the way, seismically unsafe. So let's start there. It's also a jail that's pretty barbaric and out of fashion, and really does not provide the programming space, even the medical space, even the visiting space that we need to have. So in that particular jail, I think that, frankly, when I managed the jail, I did management by walking around. I walked around the jail constantly, and I think it's very important to have the supervisors understand what their expectations are. I think it's very important to set the expectations, communicate the expectations, work on them, train to them, and make sure that they're followed and monitored them. And I think that's through supervision, and that's the people who have the boots on the ground as the supervisors and managers that have to be held
John, other than
responsible for
supervision
that.
and walking around, that kind of thing, what else should happen to prevent that sort of thing from happening?
Clearly identifying the officers you put in each category. When I worked as the high security unit manager, one of the things you did was you picked your officers based off of their skills and ability and training. You don't put an individual in charge of charge of prisoners who had already had a claim paid out on him of over $900,000. This issue inviting fighting in the back of the jail is a clear example of how they don't respect their leadership. For a deputy, 4 deputies to take a prisoner to the back of the jail and do this, when you have this administration where you have sheriffs, undersheriffs, assistant sheriffs, chief deputies, captains, lieutenants, sergeants, and senior deputies, how does it they're able to do that and not be...
Well, here's the man's answer.
point
Ross,
out-
please answer that question, though. This happened under your watch.
And I was the one who called in the FBI, which is the first time in modern history that a sheriff has requested the FBI to come in. Typically, they don't unless it's court-ordered or U.S. District Attorney requires them to.
Does it show a lack, though, for your leadership? He talked about leadership.
Not at all. In fact, I don't think he is very clear in the facts. On POBAR rights, Police Officer Bill of Rights, any deputy that's been implicated in anything prior than that, I wouldn't have been able to reassign them, and nothing had ever occurred in my administration where they've ever been before me to begin with.
But is there a problem with the culture of sheriff's deputies?
Oh, I think it could be a problem altogether with culture inside prisons and jails throughout the United States. That's why I'm the first sheriff in California, and to answer your question, to ask for body cameras to come in the jail system. I find it incomplete that President Obama and everybody else wants body cameras fitted on law enforcement in the streets of America. I can make 10 times the reasons as to why body cameras should be on every prison and jail in this country.
You agree with that, Vicki?
I don't quite agree with it. I will say that there are cameras in many of the new jails, and they're in most places where there's prisoner access. And I do think that body cameras in this case would actually help. And I do think that that's something, particularly in this linear jail, this one style of jail that we still have left in our resources. And I think it's important to take a look at that. But I think body cameras are a tool. They're not the answer. I think accountability, expectations, working day to day, and no complacency.
You've been endorsed by the
Incomplacency is the
union.
issue.
The
Yes.
union is very supportive of you.
Yes.
And in some cases, there's a question of whether you might be too close to the union. Is it hard to really go after problematic deputies if you're that close to the leadership of the union?
Not at all. Because here's the bottom line. The bottom line is I was in the department for a number of years. 25 of those years I was in executive and management positions. I sat across the table, argued with the union. I set people up for disciplinary measures. And I made sure that complacency did not happen in my watch. And I worked very hard to make sure that that happened as a captain in the jail. And then I tried to mentor people to make sure that they would continue that. Now, I was out of the department for the last 4 years, and I do see some need for training of the managers and the supervisors in this area, and making sure, once again, expectations, accountability, and any tools we can use, such as body cameras, to get to that transparency and to help that happen. I don't have a problem.
One of the things that Richard Hungisto did when I worked I worked for the administrative assistant for 2 sheriffs, Eugene Brown and Richard Hungisto. One of the things, and he brought in a person by the name of Dr. Kim. His job was to consistently evaluate personnel to determine what their qualifications were and their mental stability. We only give psychological tests to law enforcement officers when they enter, but Richard Hungisto sent us to classes periodically through our employment to consistently evaluate us to see if we were not put in positions that were challenging for us or may bring harm to another individual. When the sheriff says that the Police Bill of Rights doesn't allow him to transfer
We're short on
people.
time, so I'm sorry. Yeah.
So I want to answer this question because I think it does get to the core of why there's such vivid differences between us, in particular Ms.
Quickly,
Hennessy
if you would,
myself.
because we want to get to.
Well, the fact is that you should ask the same question of my predecessor, Mike Hennessy. He was elected 8 consecutive times, and rarely, only twice out of the 8, the deputy unions supported him. They opposed him every single time, and he hired them all because he believes, as I do, the bright line of not being beholden to the deputy unions. And this is why the kind of response, it's about response. Yes, we want to try to prevent things from happening, but you better have a very strong and firm response that also captures, I think, the ability to prevent it again, preemptive strike.
Ross, you've been in
calling in
office.
the FBI.
You've been in office almost 4 years now. How many one-on-one meetings with Mayor Lee have you had?
0. I have written him a number of letters. Maybe one of them was perfumed. I don't remember. But I mean, I tried to, and I've asked him to meet with me a number of times, and I've set questions. That hasn't stopped our staff from working together.
But isn't that a problem that the mayor, for whatever reason, you can blame the mayor, perhaps that's legitimate, but nonetheless, wouldn't the city be better off if the mayor and the sheriff were talking to each other?
Oh, I think we should be very careful about the oligarchy that's forming inside City Hall and a manipulative mayor who decides who he wants to meet with and who does not. We're elected to serve all the people, and you don't cherry pick. You get the business of the people done. But I have to tell you, the net effect of what's happened is that I've become extremely resourceful and effective in making this department, we together, a national leader in criminal justice reform without the mayor.
Vicki, you have said that Ross is not an effective communicator. How would you be more effective? And would you have a better relationship with the mayor?
I think what I've said is that he's not an effective communicator with his staff, and I think that's part of the problem. The staff doesn't have confidence, and I believe that in order to create new initiatives, you really have to work with your staff and the people on the ground that are going to be responsible for putting those initiatives into force. And I think that's something that's been missing. I think that what we've had is some leadership by headlines, particularly in the Examiner, and it's kind of interesting to see that happen. And I think that leadership requires effective communication, but communication is sometimes listening. It's not just talking, it's listening, it's assessing, it's working with people, and it's got to be two-way communication up and down.
I'd like to answer this question.
Quickly, if you would.
Yeah.
Okay. Certainly we need to create new initiatives because what's being brought out in this new rational justice policy in America that's being put together with people like Grover Norquist, the Koch brothers, Obama, are looking at things to do to incarcerate jails. But we need to have resources allocated. In this case, it's essential for the sheriff to be able to communicate with the most powerful political person in this city in order to get the funds necessary to impact the system of recidivism, a reentry, to place San Francisco in that progressive package that it would demonstrate to the nation it can take the lead.
Well,
how can you not work with the mayor when we're asking for our system to be changed?
Vicki, is the mayor making a mistake not meeting with the sheriff?
I would like to see the mayor meet with anybody that he needs to meet with to get the work done.
Is he making a mistake then?
I can't say that. That's not my call. I would say that if I'm elected sheriff and he doesn't meet with me, that would be a mistake.
But that's a snapshot as to why Ms. Hennessy is a proxy for the mayor, and that's his candidate, because I think he's going to take criminal justice system backwards. And this rationale over here that I need to be on bended knee to meet with the mayor, that's exactly the wrong direction where the San Francisco, the great San Francisco is going. And I knew Dick Hungisto really well, especially as a supervisor and the assessor. And I got to tell you, he's the first progressive sheriff, and told Mike Hennessy, who told me, you keep that bright line independence of a constitutionally elected sheriff's department away from the police and the others, because it's a checks and balance system.
Well,
are you a proxy for the? I'm sorry. Are you a proxy for the mayor? Would you
I'm
please
absolutely
respond to
not
that?
a proxy for the mayor. I have more experience than either of these two people.
Where do you disagree with the mayor on criminal justice issues?
I don't know, because the mayor hasn't talked about them very much, and I would like to speak with them about them. And I think there will be times that I will disagree with the mayor. And that's the other thing about communication. And communication is a two-way street, and you talk to people, and you don't necessarily agree to agree all the time. You have to. But I do think it's important for effective communication to take place place in government, and to talk with the district attorney, the adult probation, everybody, as well as community stakeholders. And there will be times that you don't agree.
But I can tell you where the mayor is wrong
At this
on
point, though,
public
I'm going to have to leave it there because we want to give you ample time to give your closing statements.
Are we there already?
Is that already?
So yes, it
really
goes by
ample.
quickly, doesn't
Boy,
it?
it goes by.
So to wrap up, please tell us in 30 seconds or less why people should choose you for mayor, and we will do it in this order.
You mean for
John?
sheriff?
I'm sorry,
sheriff.
for sheriff. I've promoted
Unless you
all
want
of
to
you.
announce for mayor, right in.
We'll
we're
be
too
going
late.
this order: John, Ross, and Vicki. John.
I should be sheriff because unlike what Vicki just said, I have the most experience. I'm an operational commander, certificate of honor winner. I ran the 1984 Democratic Perimeter and Arrest Commander. I also am the one that is intending to identify and promulgate a new path for San Francisco. What we need to do is to figure out how to de-incarcerate our jails.
Thank you. Ross.
I think one of the gold standards in this particular race for sheriff is the sheriff who made San Francisco famous, and that's Sheriff Mike Hennessy, elected 8 consecutive times for 32 years, who supported me in 2011 and supports me in the re-elections because we're outsiders. And he and I believe that you continue to advance the criminal justice reforms like we have in reforming transgender incarceration, having the first high school in the jail in the United States, and now City
And
College.
I have to stop you there. Thank you. Vicki?
Thank you.
I think that I should be sheriff because I worked for 30 years in the department, management and executive positions. I want to return proactive leadership to the San Francisco Sheriff's Department. I want to return the balance of public safety and social justice. And I'm there to return effective communication between our elected officials and all aspects of society. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vicki Hennessy, Ross Mirkarimi, and Mr. Robinson, John Robinson. Thank you all.
It has been a pleasure to have all of you. And thank you all for watching. For all of KQED's news coverage, please go to kqednews.org. I'm Thuy Vu for Scott Schaefer. Good night.